It has almost never occurred in the history of military warfare, a machine going up against the exact same machine in the fields of battle. But in this video, we will take a look at one of the most bizarre air battles in history, when the renowned Messerschmitt Bf-109 of the Luftwaffe would meet an evenly matched opponent, a nation that was defending itself with the exact same German-made Bf-109s. When we think of the nations that took part in the Second World War, we often tend to focus on the five major powers that were the primary forces of the conflict. And although these major Allied and Axis powers were indeed the main contributors to the war, we must remember that it was called a World War for a reason. In this struggle, many nations from all over the globe would be brought into the bloody battle. And oftentimes, it is these instances where we can find some of the most mind-boggling stories. This is one of those tales. Yugoslavia was a country in southeastern Europe for most of the 20th century. Roughly the size of England, this nation bordered both Italy and German-controlled Austria, and thus would inevitably find itself and its people roped into the perilous war. But this would not occur until 1941. Years before, in the late 1930s, the country of Yugoslavia set out in an ambitious attempt to try and modernize its air force. This was a period of great improvement in military technology across the world, with the rising Nazi Party at the forefront, so the leaders of many nations wanted to ensure that they were able to defend themselves for the war that appeared to certainly be coming. So, rather than embarking on a design crusade themselves, Yugoslavia opted to instead purchase a number of the brand new and cutting-edge Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters from Germany. Not expecting to be at war with these customers so soon, Germany permitted the deal and sent 83 Bf-109E models to the Royal Yugoslav Air Force in early 1939. These fighters were graciously accepted by the Yugoslav pilots as it was quite an upgrade from the outdated aircraft that they had previously been outfitted with. But very quickly, the relations that allowed for this trade to take place would begin to falter. As 1940 came and passed, Hitler's ambitions continued to grow, and his attempted expansion of the Third Reich became an ever-present fear for all nations of Europe, and pretty soon, Yugoslavia would find itself next in line. In April of 1941, the Axis powers moved in and began an invasion of Yugoslavia. The smaller and less powerful country realistically stood little chance against the much larger and more advanced military, but they would not go down without a fight. Just before the invasion, the Royal Yugoslav Air Force had around 54 Messerschmitt Bf-109s in service. The reason for this number not being larger was actually because of a fairly cunning German war tactic. Although they did make the ill-advised decision of selling their most advanced aircraft to a country that they would soon be at war with, they were not completely dumb. As time passed from the purchase of the Messerschmitt fighters, many 109s would need spare parts to repair normal damage and wear, and the only place that these parts were produced was, you guessed it, in German-controlled factories. Thus, it was ensured that these parts rarely, if ever, got out to the countries that might have the potential to use their 109s against Germany. And so, as the German military poured into the country, approximately 60 of the 83 109s were ready to fight. It is here that we would see one of the rare times in history when Bf-109s of the famous Luftwaffe would actually tangle against other Bf-109s. And, like one would expect, the results were a fairly even match. It is obvious that many of the German pilots had prior combat experience that the Royal Yugoslav Air Force lacked, but this advantage was likely countered by the fact that they were defending their homeland, which no doubt provided them with both strategic and morale advantages. As the fighting began on April 6th of 1941, the primary role of the Luftwaffe was strategic bombing raids of Belgrade. These consisted of Juncker's Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers that were escorted by 109s. These attack waves would be intercepted by the 51st and 32nd Fighter Groups of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force. In this first day of combat, the fighters from the 51st claimed 7 German aircraft shot down, losing 5 of their own, while the 32nd claimed 4 more bombers destroyed at a loss of only 2. Clearly, it appeared to be an evenly matched battle in the skies, as both sides took significant losses. But unfortunately for the defending Yugoslavs, the German Luftwaffe possessed one key advantage that would allow them to quickly take the upper hand: numbers. Both on the ground and in the air, the Yugoslav defenders simply couldn't match the manpower that Germany brought to the table. When the Luftwaffe lost a fighter at this point in the war, it could be replaced fairly easily with a new pilot and plane. The Yugoslavs, on the other hand, were in short supply of both. Because of this, the struggle was destined to be lost. In addition, there was another important factor that likely worked against the Royal Yugoslav Air Force on this occasion and is a bit of an outlier in history: the fact that their anti-aircraft fire was made relatively ineffective. In any air battle over land, the advantage of fire support from the ground would play a key role in defending against enemy attacks. But in this bizarre battle, Yugoslav anti-aircraft crews actually struggled to differentiate between friend and foe oftentimes, seeing that both sides were flying the same planes and their outlines appeared identical from the ground. This unfortunately caused multiple friendly fire incidents and negated a substantial advantage that the Yugoslavs would have normally had. Another interesting note from this conflict was that this was also one of the rare occasions where a handful of pilots would actually end up switching sides in the war. One prime example of this can be seen in Mato Dukovac, the leading Croatian fighter ace of World War II. Croatia was actually a part of Yugoslavia before the German invasion, so when Hitler invaded this region, Dukovac was actually a member of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force and participated in the defense against the Luftwaffe. But after the battle would be lost, the new nation of Croatia would join the Axis side, taking with it the few pilots that it had. Thus, Mato Dukovac would actually join a Croatian wing of the Luftwaffe just a few months later and would go on to fight against the Soviets. By 1944, he would take down no less than 40 enemy aircraft and was a highly decorated ace. But by the end of that year, he could not bear fighting for the Germans any longer and would defect to the Soviet Union. He would end up back in the remnants of the new Yugoslav Air Force by the end of the war, and is another example of how strange the circumstances around this battle truly were. The fighting for Yugoslav would actually end fairly quickly, and just after 12 days, the invasion was over and Germany had bested the weaker country. Nearly all of the Yugoslav Bf-109s had either been destroyed in combat or by grounds crews to prevent them from falling into German hands. Thus, this strange air battle would end just as quickly as it began, and would conclude one of the most unique and evenly matched air battles in history. Thanks for watching, please click subscribe, and I'll see you next time.